Alright, what is going on with F45 in the news? What's real? What's fake? What's dramatized? Does it mean anything? Is it all bullshit? What is actually going on at the moment? So I wanted to break down in a few different segments what is actually going on in the news at the moment to give a better understanding for it. Firstly, why listen to me on this topic? I'm an F45 owner with 2 studios in Sydney, which I still operate today and I have for over 8 years. So I have really good context with what's actually happening at F45. Secondly, I'm a business coach for boutique gyms helping studio owners grow their own businesses. I currently work with over 10 competing brands in the space, so I have a really good context about what's happening with all the other franchises and also all the other businesses. I work with over 10 competing brands with them and also many independents, so I've got a really good gauge about what's happening in the actual industry across multiple countries. Thirdly is that professionally, before I got into the fitness industry, my background is actually in media and marketing, and I did that for 8 years, so I have a really good context about what's actually happening from the media publication side of things. So that gives me professional experience of about a decade in these 3 areas, which gives me a really good context to be able to speak to this topic. So I'm going to break this video down into 3 parts. The first one is what is actually going on in the fitness industry for boutique gyms. Secondly, what's actually happening and what is the real latest with F45 training. Thirdly is addressing the media stories and what's actually happening from a media perspective. Okay, so let's jump straight in. So firstly is what's happening currently in the fitness industry. So I work with about 100 studios as of today across basically any single brand you can think of. That includes franchises, independent gyms, you name it. One thing we're really seeing in the market is a split, and this is across any brand. There are many F45s that are crushing it, and there's some closing down. Basically, every single other brand has studios crushing it, and they have some which are underperforming and closing down. So the question is why? The most common denominator in all of these instances is the operator. A good operator will be able to take basically any single brand and run it successfully. A lot of the operations with a gym are actually quite generic. You need to be able to generate leads, you need to be able to sell the leads, get a team, engage the clients, keep them accountable, run challenges, have retention rhythms. It's because most of the principles of running a gym are actually generic and not so much about the brand on the wall. Another trend I'm seeing is the investor models in basically any of these brands, any of them including F45, aren't doing as well as what they used to do. The studio owners that are actively involved in the business typically get far better returns because they're actively involved in growing the gym, changing the marketing, moving with the trends, engaging the staff, engaging the members, all the things you are required to run a successful gym. What I am also seeing in the market is there is a slight correction which is happening at the moment. I'm seeing this across Australia and also in America, and I think it's also happening in New Zealand as well. So there are some studios which are starting to close down, which can be part of a COVID hangover, bad operations, lack of staff, which is basically playing a part, and we're seeing there's a bit of a shift in the market which is happening today. That's across all brands. There is also other factors such as location, which plays a part of it, and economic factors, but I can tell you firsthand they're not as important as the operator of each of these businesses. Of course, they do play a big part, and if you have studios that are in, for example, CBD locations, they were much more profitable prior to COVID than they are post-COVID. One other thing we're also seeing is this COVID hangover is starting to catch up to a lot of businesses now. This is brand agnostic and is not immune to other industries as well, but the fitness industry gets hit really hard. So a lot of these businesses that were locked down, of course, during COVID, they've been pushing back a lot of the payments and starting to catch up to them now. So even though they're fully operational, they're still paying off debts from 2021, 2020, and it's just becoming more operationally difficult to keep on top of it. That's also playing a part in these businesses closing down. But what we're also seeing in the industry right now is people do want to go to a group gym. Group training as a category is still expanding. They want a great experience, something they can tell their friends, they can hang out with, it becomes social. So in terms of an industry, it's growing, the pool's getting bigger, people are getting more engaged with the brands, but everything comes down to the trainers and the people, without a doubt. So that's generally what's happening in the industry at the moment. So let's talk about the latest with the F45 training. Bit of backstory on this as well, because it gives some good context around what's happening. F45 started 10 years ago, and the growth trajectory of that business was exceptional. Within about 7 years, they had 2,000 studios. And for those that remember the hype that was happening at that time, it was becoming the success story. Once they had hit almost like a critical mass, the main focus of F45 became expanding internationally. And that's what a lot of this story came from. So if you think about from a media side of things, this narrative about it being such an amazing brand, this growth, this Australian amazing story of these entrepreneurs who have crushed it, they've done so well, it became this rolling story that was happening in the media. When they decided to list on the New York Stock Exchange, it was the first Australian company to ever list on the New York Stock Exchange. This was huge global news at the time. So they launched this IPO and all over the media. It was this amazing story that came on, and that was prior to all of this happening, of course. You also had these massive celebrity endorsements from people like Mark Wahlberg, David Beckham, to name a few. There's a lot of people who associate themselves with the brand. So the hype was immense. They then listed on the New York Stock Exchange, the IPO was launched, and this was mid-COVID. So lockdowns were occurring all around the world, monetary systems were tightening, investors didn't want to spend money, and all these macroeconomic factors were starting to impact what was happening with F45's growth. Now, when they launched on the New York Stock Exchange, the sale price and the share price was sold on the growth trajectory. They were planning to open 1,000 studios in a year. So if you think of this from an investor point of view, that's what they're looking at, that's what they're projecting their numbers on. So when they launched, the price skyrocketed, and then basically growth went to an absolute halt. Investors weren't looking to buy into gyms when everything's closed down. Gyms weren't even open at this point. So from a share price perspective, it absolutely went up and then it just tanked. And bearing in mind, it was all over the media before this point. So it became a story about this amazing Australian brand which launched in New York, became a global superstar, moving towards $1 billion valuation in the market, and then the share price absolutely plummeted because they could not grow, essentially. Now, the problem is, from a HQ perspective, is they geared the entire business up for growth. They hired more. They had increased sales teams. They were basically getting ready to onboard hundreds of studios, and none of that had happened. So basically, from a structural perspective, they were geared up for the wrong strategies to go to market. And because now they're listed on the New York Stock Exchange, everything's public. So the share price has plummeted at this point, and everyone can see it every single day. So that started to become the headlines that was really occurring. Now by this point, keep in mind, they're still growing studios each year. It's just nowhere near as fast as what they wanted to. Fast forward about a year, COVID started to take an impact. It's hurting all businesses all around the country, all around the world, and these small business owners are starting to get seriously impacted. Now, there's a lot of other factors that come into this, but that played a major role. So studios, for example, that were in a CBD location crushing it in 2019, when everything reopened in 2021, they're not crushing it. There's no one there. It's super tough. And I feel for these business owners because you would not have been able to predict this. And a lot of these things you can't do. It's like having a cafe right in the middle of Sydney CBD. You open up, you're paying full rent again, no one's there. What do you do? Also, about 40% of the fitness industry left during that time because they needed to get jobs. So it's super hard to hire. And I know this wasn't mutually exclusive to F45. It was across industry, but that's basically what happened as well. So in particular, the ones that were in investor models were trying to struggle to hire. They're trying to get their feet back and running on the ground. Business is tough in general, and this has added extra pressure to it. Now, bearing in mind, prior to COVID, F45 had about 500 studios in Australia. The nearest brand at that point was probably 50 or so. So if you look at the sheer size of the company prior to COVID to coming out of COVID, it's a huge difference. So as you can imagine, mathematically, there's going to be more F45s closing down post-COVID than any other brand. It has to be. So there were locations that started to close down because of the increased pressure on rent and other factors that come into it. Now, bearing in mind, what happens from a local lens is not really much to do with HQ on that perspective. And the news around what's happening in New York, obviously they can then kind of roll the story on from a media perspective. It also costs about $8 million a year to be listed on the stock exchange, and this was out of F45's expense. It also takes a lot of time away from them operating the actual business. So they made a decision earlier this year to basically delist on the stock exchange so they could focus more on franchises. So the latest update is they're now off the New York Stock Exchange, which saves them a lot of time, a lot of money, and they can focus on actual franchises again and put more energy and effort into it. They've also recruited within HQ perspective to be able to help franchisees grow their business, make better products, make better services, and basically get more support. This has all happened this year. I can tell you as a franchisee, I can see this happening. So from my perspective, from a franchisee, they're fine. I barely even noticed. Speaking from my own studios, from a local lens, we've actually had a great last few months. We've had many people come back in the studio. We're getting many new members who are just looking to lose weight and change their life. I haven't really noticed much of an issue with the news personally for me, for my studios. I haven't even had a member bring it up with me probably in the last month. The first few times it came up, I got asked quite a few times, but since then it just feels like another story, and I think most people can kind of read through the media. Okay, so that's the quick backstory of F45. Let's talk about the media. What's actually happening with the media? So it is no secret that media publications want one thing: attention. Their business model is about getting engagement. So they will do whatever they can to basically get likes, shares, all that kind of stuff. Readership is what sells them advertising on their platform. So basically, the more people they can bring in to their media publication, the more money they make. F45 has been a hot topic in the media for years, well before this happened. The dramatized story of this success story which happened, they listed on the stock exchange to a crash. It feels like it's a great story if you think about it. So it's actually in their best interest to dramatize this and to continue the narrative which people already have in their head, and bring it down to a local lens. So when a local business in somewhere in a CBD location, say in WA, closes down, they can run a newspaper article, which I think is so unfair to that particular owner, and try to tie in what's happened with the New York Stock Exchange from a HQ perspective. They're not really connected. Yes, you could argue there are some pieces that are connected with it, but they're totally relevant. I've known a lot of these owners to shut down across different brands. Some of the stories are really personal. So F45 in Australia is the most recognizable brand when it comes to boutique gyms. So essentially, if you mention the name in any newspaper article, you will get more hits. It's why you see so many stories relate back to F45, even if the person doesn't have an association with it, because the publications know it will get liked. So this means that every single small business which closes down, they can make a big article about it, and they're trying to dramatize it a bit more. You know, fifth one closes down, sixth one closes down. Remember, there are 500, and it's so sad to see this kind of thing because these are real people that are actually impacted by it. They might have had a business in a CBD location and there's no traffic. I keep using that example because that happened a lot, and it's pretty reasonable if you think about it. And it's a shame because these are good operators that are in bad locations, for example, or something's happened where they just can't run the business like they used to. Or there might have been some change, for example, with the landlord, they might have to shut their business. These things happen. A lot of the F45 studios are coming up to their 10-year, which means you've got to renew your leases as well. And they might have fallen through with lease negotiations. Like, these are some of the scenarios that's going on. So they decide to shut their business instead of re-sign another 10-year lease and then whatever. Like these are some of the scenarios. And also because a lot of them were investor models prior to COVID, they are less impactful now, which unfortunately means that the business starts to go down in terms of the results. It's because the whole market changed. I'm not saying whether it's good or bad, right or wrong. What I'm saying is these are some of the scenarios which are happening. And then on the news, they dramatize every single element of it. They sometimes relate it back to Mark Wahlberg if it's a local studio closing down. Again, Mark Wahlberg's gonna get some clicks as well, but everything is choreographed to basically make people want to click to it, to buy into the story. And because the narrative is already there, they're starting to basically write more and more of it. Honestly, it's smoke and mirrors. And yes, there are gonna be studios closing down. What's really interesting at the moment too is there are other brands which are closing down which don't hit the media. If an F45 closed down, if 10 other brands close down, they'll run the F45 story. Why is that? It's because it's going to get more clicks. Essentially, if they mention one of the other brands closing down, it just won't get as much reach in the media. That's what it is. And running businesses mathematically is actually one of the toughest things to do. Many businesses close down, so it's not unusual for businesses to close down in any industry, in any time of the year, even in good economic conditions. So in short, yes, it is definitely dramatized. It's not necessarily false, but there's so much more going on behind the scenes, and also it's across different brands as well. And I think with this correction in market, you're gonna see it happen more, and I don't think it's gonna necessarily stop anytime soon. There'll be another article coming out where someone closes down, unfortunately, and again, it's gonna hit the media, and they're gonna kind of build that story as well. For us, it hasn't really impacted us. I think the longer they're doing this as well, people kind of become immune to it. The story's kind of getting a little bit dull because they're kind of running almost the same story when it happens. What I find quite interesting is from a member side of things, I see very little talk about it. When our first articles came out, there was a lot of talk from members. We actually addressed it publicly in our groups, just gave them an update what's going on, and everyone seemed fine. Like, the dumbbells still work, the bikes still work, creating a calorie deficit still works for fat loss. Like, the human body hasn't changed. They can still get incredible results in the studio following these methods. And we know that because it works. Where I find actually more talk in the media about this one is actually a lot of owners. So a lot of people that are more invested in the brand itself are rightfully so asking questions around what's happening with it. The interesting thing is this impacts more than just F45. People starting to question other brands, and I know this because I speak to owners from other brands. It actually is impacting the growth of other brands, other competitors, and it's actually impacting the boutique industry in general, because people are starting to question, is this other brand going to last 10 years? What's the difference between this one? Or is the model still working for these brands? Like, a lot of these have similar business models, and a lot of them are based around similar aspects within the gym. So it's actually impacting the industry as a whole, but I'm finding it's actually becoming more of a talk between the people that are involved in it from an investor and a financial perspective, which again makes total sense. But from a member side of things, haven't really noticed too much. But just keep in mind, a lot of these are the same journalists as well. There's one journalist in particular who just always writes about it. And the thing is, when it hits the media, it just becomes this broad publication. That's just the way media articles work. So they like when people jump on and write comments and things like that, because again, it adds engagement to the story. Remember, they just want clicks and viewers so they can sell more advertising. They'll run any story. If they have to dramatize it, then so be it, but they will run stories to be able to do that to the consumer. They have a business to run too. So I hope that answers some questions, because I'm getting quite a lot of them on it. That might give you some more context around what's actually happening. Obviously, you see an article and wonder what's actually happening behind closed doors, what's actually happening in the industry, why they're writing that article. And I hope this gives you a lot more context around the whole scenario and what's happening as well. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching this YouTube video. Feel free to subscribe to my channel down below.